In today's video, we are officially starting the journey of saving Monty. I'm committing to keeping this car and bringing it back to life. For today's job, I need to be able to move this in and out easily, so it needs to be running again. And I hear that's a fairly important step in getting a car registered too. I'm sure that will probably uncover more issues once we do get it moving, but let's start by diagnosing why it had no fuel so we can hear it running again, and we'll move from there. So, last time I tried to move this, an EB Fairmont, that was my first ever car, it wouldn't start. I may have already sorted the issue, but I'll take you through the process past me went through now. Fortunately, I had cameras on for it. For once, the root cause was pretty obvious. You should be able to hear the fuel pump kick in and prime for a few seconds when you turn the key to the on position, but all I could hear was a few relays clicking. The relays clicking was a promising sign because it's likely one of them was for the fuel pump. I did dive in and quickly check for the easiest solution, which would have been a blown fuse, but all looked good there. So it was time to check if power was making it as far as the fuel pump, or if there was an issue before this, like some bad wiring somewhere along the way. The fuel pump in these cars can be accessed in the boot under this cover. Whip that off, hook the multimeter up, and we can check for voltage at the wiring for the fuel pump when the key is turned on. We can see it spike to 12 volt or slightly more briefly when the key is turned and return to zero as it should with this priming. So our wiring looks to be okay at this point, and we probably have a dead fuel pump. I've not had the best of luck replacing fuel pumps recently, but this one seemed a little easier than in our BA Falcon by all reports. And at least it's not as tedious as trying to find a wiring issue. So I got to work removing the old fuel pump. Clean the area quickly, then the first hurdle is this hose clamp around the lock ring. A real pain to get into, but a small flat blade ratchet bit and my smallest 1/4 inch ratchet just squeezed in to loosen that off. Getting a bit ahead of myself, but the fuel hoses and wiring were also taken off. I don't have the specific tool to remove that lock ring, but how hard can it be? Caveman tools time, as it often is around here. First attempt hammering it in an anti-clockwise direction with a punch nearly broke one of the tabs off, so I wanted to try something different. I'd read and seen in manuals even that dropping the fuel tank down a little would take some tension off everything and make this easier. I didn't believe it either, but it's only 2 nuts to loosen off, so can't hurt trying, and it seems that actually did make a difference. And with that, the crusty old fuel pump is free. The fuel pump I'm using to replace this is a Walbro 255 as well as a universal fitting kit. Not necessarily because I think we need the extra fuel just yet, but I had one there anyway, and they're a good cheap upgrade that shouldn't need extra upgrades to wiring or the fuel system to run. It did take some mucking around to get it to work though. Old assembly was stripped down and the old clamp for the pump wouldn't hold the slightly smaller 255. So the fixed half was bent to accommodate and a hose clamp is used. The old feed connection wouldn't work with the new pump either, so a section of submersible fuel hose was cut to length and will be clamped on. I'd worked out through the million test fits I did that the bottom seat would also need modifying for the new filter style to fit on. Some just cut this off. I instead waited for the fuel vapor to evaporate and made the opening larger with a die grinder off camera, wired it up, and all assembled we end up with something looking like this. This could now be dropped back in reverse order of removal as they say, except for that stupid hose clamp around the locking ring. It was bothering me and it was hard enough to get that lock ring off anyway, so surely it won't need it. fuel filter was also changed off camera, but didn't look to be in bad shape anyway. Then, it was the moment of truth. Will it prime, or have I wasted my time? Great, and will it start? Briefly, but I have a good idea why it died. I go around looking for fuel leaks and then up to that damn vacuum line to the map sensor that split again. I will replace this and all the vacuum lines one day. Quick fix for now though by cutting to a good section and rejoining once again. Our worksite supervisor for the day, a blue-tongued lizard I'd named Heidi, approves my dodgy fix and we can try to run it again. All good, and it already sounds better than a Barrow again. Then on to finishing up, and the tank was tightened back up into position. No, please don't help Heidi. Not like the tank is heavy or anything. Typical supervisor. Probably works for the council or something. This gave me a chance to take it out quickly, just nearby, to make sure all was good, and to give Mrs. Browney a manual driving refresher, which went well.
Just neighbouring up. Yep. Clutching. Yeah, start it. You alright? Yeah. Go.
Jesus.
Lucky she's got a good sense of humour, but no, seriously, she did great after that, especially considering she wasn't feeling well that day. But I had noticed the brake pedal was a bit harder than I expected when I drove it, so I started to double check that booster. First, I did a quick pedal check, just turn the car off and pump the brake pedal until it's really firm. Hold it there, then start the car, and if the pedal moves further towards the floor without any extra force from you, then you do have a working brake booster still. At least somewhat. So I was just being a baby about the firm pedal, it seems. Lucky I continued the checks though, cause that's when I noticed a small brake fluid leak from the master cylinder, and you can see the stains of where the fluid was running down the booster. So yeah, it's a bit of a safety issue there obviously, blah blah blah. I just don't want brake fluid eating the paint and leaving the chassis to rust underneath that. I could have bought a rebuild kit for the master cylinder for slightly less, but I wanted to make this job simple for once. I want it to just work, and I really want that bright, ugly fluid reservoir on top to be gone. Seems they don't make new PBR ones anymore, like factory I believe, but I've sourced a new one that seemed to have good feedback, and I'll save the other for a rebuild one day if need be. That brings us to the part of the video where I need to be clear. This is not an instructional video. I don't want to be responsible for killing anyone out there. I am a backyard hack and not a mechanic. But I'll take you along with me as we go through the job and see how it turns out. I'm really trying to keep the habit of soaking all fasteners in penetrant spray, and have hit the brake bleeders on each wheel as well while I'm at it, because we're going to need those shortly. Fluid is then removed from the reservoir. I've used this Airboy bleeder that runs off a compressor, but any old pump, syringe or even a turkey baster will work. These flare nut spanners are great for not rounding nuts when only a spanner will fit, like the brake lines running into the master. Just be sure to catch any brake fluid or wash it off quickly, because as I mentioned, it will destroy paint. More on that in a minute. 2 more nuts and the master with its ugly reservoir are out, which gives a good chance now to visually check the booster. These earlier cars did at least come with a metal booster, so that's a pro, rather than later plastic that can split. But at least plastic doesn't rust like this one had. Not terrible, but the ED shell looked to have a cleaner one, so that's coming out to be swapped too. And so it's under the dash we go, and once you contort yourself in there, you'll see the brake pedal attaching to the rod for the booster. We need that retaining clip pulled off with pliers or a screwdriver, then unbolt it from the firewall, and that can come out too, with a bit of finagling. Really only because I didn't move as much as I should have out the way, always making my own life harder somehow. And I know I joked about this only being for rust prevention. Well, it had started already. Only just so, and I took the chance with the extra room to clean, neutralise and brush on some poor 15 here to stop this being an issue for a while at least, as well as a few other spots. The booster from the ED got a full rattle can rebuild as well as a new check valve and grommet and was thrown back in, taking much more care this time because I'd spent far too long cleaning and painting this. The new master cylinder was mounted, and before being hooked up I put Mrs. Browney to work to help bleed this a little. With lines off and plenty of rags ready, I filled the master. The brake pedal is then pumped and the outlets of the master blocked with my finger when the pedal is lifted. Once fluid starts coming out, the lines are connected and tightened. Not sure how important this is or if it's even correct, but it reduces some air in the lines, in my head at least. And even if none of this works, at very least let's clean the engine bay up a touch. Yes, it needs much more tidying, that's to come. None of this will work well without everyone's favourite job, bleeding the brakes. And that job will be even worse if you snap one of those bleeders off, as I have before. So here's how I try to prevent that now. With plenty of penetrant spray ahead of time as mentioned earlier, I also knock around the area with a hammer a little to try put some vibration through any rust that may be there in the threads. A drill bit sized to fit snugly in the bleed nipple is also added to fill this void and strengthen this against any force that isn't purely rotational. And a good socket or flare end spanner is used again to crack it loose, being patient to repeat steps if it is stubborn. You could also resort to heating and cooling if it's looking bad, but it must have been my lucky day because there was no damage to nipples in the shirt that day. I've never really had much luck with that vacuum bleeder tool I showed earlier for actually bleeding brakes. Any old hose and bottle can work as well, and that's how I've used it while Mrs. Browney again assists up front. First by pumping the new fluid through while watching to keep the reservoir full, and damn, it looks like Mrs. Browney has been working out. Could have shaved for the video though. Then with the nipple closed, the pedal is pumped several times and held down while I crack the nipple open and closed. Then repeating this until there's no air coming out. Do this starting from rear passenger side and walk closer to the master until you're done. I always get really in my own head and doubtful of my work anytime I touch something on the brakes, so let's do just a quick test up and down in the driveway just to make sure I haven't done anything horribly wrong. Okay, that worked. I think that booster feels a little bit better too, so we might have made the right call by changing that out. The old one might have been on its way out. Let's try going back in, maybe a slightly harder stop. Well, that worked. They feel okay. I'll do a bit more testing when I can, but we didn't go through the back of the shed, so they are at least working somewhat. They feel all right. As I said, I always get in my own head when I'm doing brakes. I think they're feeling good. That's not where I thought this video would go, but I'm glad it's sorted. I'm starting to remember just how big a project this could turn into, but I'll just keep chipping away at it. We'll get there eventually. Next up, I should be starting to dive into the repairs on that rear quarter, but let's see where we end up. We saw where this video took us. Hope to see you all then. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you've enjoyed this one. Cheers.